Hello, chess fans, dictators, and dictators to be. Can't forget you guys. In this video blog, we're going to be looking at the game from week 4 in the 2013 US Chess League, the Scorpions versus Manhattan Applesauce. We're going to look at board 3, where Ryan Goldenberg is playing white against Robbie Adamson. Okay, Ryan is playing white and he plays e4 and c5. Now both of these players are very tactical. I don't know a whole lot about Ryan, but his games in the league so far have been very crisp and sharp. So this should be a good game. Knight f3 d6, d4, cd4, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6, the Najdorf, bishop e3, several options for white. I prefer bishop g5. Let's get into the theory quickly and deeply. e6, f3, bishop e7, queen to d2. It's an English attack. Castles long, knight c6, g4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, b5, king to b1, bishop b7, g5, and knight to d7. Actually, we've gone through this rather quickly because this is all standard stuff. The plans are really crystal clear here. White is going to try and kill black on the king side. Black is going to try and kill white on the queen side. Very simple game plan. Blood. That's all it is. Now, the typical move here is h4, but Ryan played the move rook to g1. Now, here Robbie played rook to c8. We go back for a moment. I think b4 is a better alternative. And one thing about the Najdorf, there's one really, really important thing about the Najdorf. The most important thing about the Najdorf is timing. If we allow white to solidify in some way on the queen side, then black's not going to be able to crash through so easy. So b4 is designed to try and bring pressure right away. So if we do a setup like this, it looks pretty level to me. With experience behind lines like this, I would rather have black, to be honest with you. But white's just fine. White's got his attack going on the king side as well. It's double-edged. Going back to the game position here, Robbie plays rook to c8, and now Ryan plays a very interesting move. He plays a3. Robbie continued with knight e5, queen f2, and now he plays queen to c7. I think he should have probably tried knight to c4, but I still think that white gets the better of this after f4 here. Now it looks very tempting to play e5 here, and that is an interesting line, or queen to c7 is possible. When after bishop c4, queen takes c4, f5, I'm sure that you would agree that white has established the initiative and is looking pretty good here. So e5 looks interesting. And now the key for white here is not to back off, but to play bishop takes e5. If he plays f takes e5, then we get some interesting play here with knight takes b2, king takes, pawn takes, bishop b6. If instead bishop takes e5, queen a5 all of a sudden puts some doubts into white's position around his king. For example, if rook a1, b4 is just simply crushing for black. And if knight to b1, then b4 leads to an unclear position. So that's why I think that back here, bishop to b6 is the line to play. Now bishop takes a3, king a2, and queen to e7. I think white is looking okay here, but the tactics are there for black as well, so it's a double-edged game. However, there is a fly in the ointment in this position for black, and that's not with f takes e5, that's with bishop takes e5. A very sharp and aggressive move. Now, knight takes e5. We notice that the pawn is pinned to the queen. So f e5, rook takes c3, b c3, queen c7, bishop to h3, bishop takes e4, ed6, bishop takes d6, and now queen to d4. Play is very complex, but I think white should be just fine here. This is all avoided by playing queen to c7 instead of knight to c4, but knight to c4 is a very thematic looking move. So Robbie played queen to c7 and now f4. And this move seems to leave white with a clearly superior position here. Robbie now drops a knight back to c6. I am sure that was not his first choice, and I think that he saw that after knight c4 things get rather complicated after f5. And let's take a look here. Well, first of all, he could also try trading on c4. Queen takes f5, e5. I think this tends to give black a little bit more defensive chances. So after knight c4, I think f5 is the sharpest line. And then knight takes b2. You know, if you're going to go this way, you got to be prepared for this sacrifice. And the point behind this is after king takes, then you go e5. And now there's a whole bunch of stuff you need to calculate when you're playing the move knight to c4, threatening to take on b2. And one of the things here is f6, and the other is knight to d5. Let's look at knight d5 first. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and if we take the bishop, then he goes f6. We can check. King to b1, bishop to d8, pawn takes, and rook to e8. The dead body defense, that pawn on g7 is a white pawn. White cannot capture it, so it actually makes his attack a little more difficult to pull through, but it makes the h and f pawns a little more weak. Bishop d3, hitting the h pawn. Rook to c4, saying please take my rook, it's not worth as much as your bishop. And it also has the threat of rook to a4, rook takes a3, and rook a1 mate. Pretty brutal caveman stuff, but it's there. So it's a pretty complex position. And when you're looking at this position, from back here, deciding to play knight to c6 or knight to c4, or it's not so easy. It's a big drastic change on the board. Okay, so going back after knight c4, f5, and takes, e5. We just looked at knight to d5, unclear. And now we have f6 that we're going to look at. Now, e takes d4, queen takes d4, or he could play knight to d5, which would transpose to what we just looked at. So queen takes d4. Bishop d8, f takes g7, very similar. Rook e8, again, the dead body defense. Bishop h3 hits the rook, pushes it away. Bishop f5, attacking the h7 pawn. Queen to c5, like to trade queens, even at the cost of a pawn. Now, b4 I think is the interesting move here. Because after a b4, we can go bishop to e7, and that pawn on b4 is hit, and to save it he'll have to try rook to b6, but now just play bishop takes b4 anyway. A rather surprising and shocking move when you see it come on the board, but the Najdorf is full of these kind of things. The geometry of this opening is just so fantastic. And the point here is, if rook takes b4, then we get bishop takes e4. We're hitting the bishop on f5 and the rook on b4. And if he trades rooks, then we just take the bishop on f5, because when we recapture on b8, it's with check. So knight takes e4 looks the best. Now rook takes rook, king up, and then we trade back the rooks for the pieces. And it's very unclear here. Probably end up being a draw, to be honest with you. And after bishop takes b4, you can try the desperado move of bishop takes h7, gaining a pawn out of this. Bishop takes e4, and again things are still very unclear. White has an extra pawn in this line. Now remember, the g7 pawn is going to fall with ease, but he has an extra pawn in this line at least. But it's a bishop versus knight. Now it's hard to say. again, let's remember this position and try and realize all that from here when you play knight to c4. And add to that, it's a short time control. So Robbie makes the best decision here and plays knight to c6, even though this does give white a slightly better position. Bishop b6 was played. Now where to put the queen? That's a big question. Going to d7 has some pluses and minuses to it. For one, the minus that you're looking at is putting the queen on the same file as the opponent's rook. That's never a good thing. On the plus side, though, it does slow down white's idea of playing f5 with any grand effect. Of course, you can play bishop to h3, and then you can try something like g6, and you're pretty well locked up on the light squares. White would still have a definite advantage, or clear advantage, I should say, after that, but that's a possibility. Robbie, being the attacker, wants to play for the attack on the b file. So he plays queen to b8. But this file is so cluttered with pieces right now, it's hard to see how it's going to come clear. Ryan plays rook to g3. He's going for the caveman approach. He's going to play rook to h3, queen to h4, and queen to h7 mate. So he's threatening mate in 3 here. b4. Robbie lashes out right away. He wants to shatter the pawn structure on the enemy king side. Now this is one of the downsides to playing a3 in a Sicilian like this. When you bring a pawn in front of your king forward, you're bringing it one step closer to confrontation with your enemy. So that means the likelihood of your enemy busting things open sooner than you would on the other side, where we can see Robbie has not moved any of his pawns on the king side. Black will get there quicker. However, the thing that you have to weigh in all of this is, even though he's quicker, is it as strong? And a lot of times when you play a3 in the Sicilian as white, you have to figure out whether or not you're going to weather the storm. And it takes a lot of deep calculations. Ryan took. Robbie took back with a horse. And there's still clutter on the b file, but at least we got the pawn out of the way, which is a major obstacle. So now b2 is looking like a juicy target for some time in the future. Now, I think Ryan had a better way to continue his attack. He played the straightforward caveman rook h3, queen h4, h7 mate. But let's look at f5. This is a very thematic type break in the Sicilian with white. And since we know they are typical type lines, or thematic lines in an opening, you should always give them a look. And so let's look at f5. And I think the best defense here is, sadly, to play g6. I've looked at other lines, and it just seems that this is the best line for black. And now, of course, f6 looks hard for black to defend, but he's actually going to be okay, because he'll be able to play h5, and then once g takes h5 en passant, black will play king to h7, and he'll play that dead body defense with the white pawn on h6 and a white pawn on f6. And if you can trade off that knight on c3, there is no way that white's going to be able to attack him. So bishop h3 now. The idea is putting the bishop on a purposeful diagonal, and that would be to try and take on e6 twice here, which would crush things open. So black cannot allow that. He plays instead rook to c4. Rook c to e8 just seems a little too cramping to me, but let's take a look. f6, bishop to d8, bishop to e3. No need to take that bishop. He's all cramped in. His rooks are on e8 and f8 doing absolutely nothing. Knight c6, queen to f4, knight e5, queen to h4, and now bishop to g4 and rook h3 is pretty much a caveman approach, and in that situation playing h5 is not going to work, because he can play bishop takes h5, pawn takes h5, queen takes h5. When the queen and rook are on the h file, nothing's stopping mate at that point. So you have to play it now in order to prevent bishop g4. Bishop g4 is answered by knight takes g4, and then once rook takes, you don't need to recapture. You don't need to risk opening up your position anymore. You've just taken away any of his pieces to sack. And now g takes h6 really would have to be tried, and king h7, the dead body defense I mentioned, shows up. Bishop to g2, bishop to a8, and at this point white has a huge positional plus. There's no doubt about it. You know, white may have to do some defending here once black starts to untangle his pieces, but in the long run, you know, white's surely got to win this. So that's one of the reasons we should look at the move. Instead of rook c to e8, which we just looked at, rook to c4. It's a more enterprising try. Queen to e2, hitting the rook. Rook to c6, hitting the bishop. Bishop to a5. Bishop to a8. Rook to d4, hitting that knight. Now rook takes c3. Rook takes c3. Knight to c6. Rook takes c6. Bishop takes c6. F takes e6. It's a fun forcing line for white that seems to favor white. Yeah, I would definitely want to have the white pieces here. The black king is not going to stay very comfortable for very long. Is it winning right at this point? Yeah, I'd say that white's actually winning here. Whereas in the game, after rook to h3, white's still clearly for choice, but things are not so clear. Until Robbie plays g6. And now things start to go downhill quickly. As I mentioned, though, the Najdorf is a forgiving defense. If he had played bishop to a8, that was his best move here, or c6. The idea is to clear the b file. Bishop to e2, rook f to e8, and now rook to f1, getting ready to bust through with f5. How does black defend this position? Well, the only hope for salvation is to play rook to f8. And the idea is if white tries to open up the f-file, we'll have counter battery along that file. So, trying to get some tit for tat there. But a mistake, though it looks like it is a good defending move, is bishop to f8. And the reason is after f5 and e5, you don't want to allow the trades because you no longer have anything contesting the f-file. It's a very beautiful move here. Let me do this for you. Let me flip the board for you. Okay, it's white to play and win. You're playing white. Take a look at this position. Pause the video if you need extra time and determine the winning plan for white here. When you're ready, hit play and we'll see what your answer is. Okay, we're going to move on here. The winning move here is rook takes h7. It is just absolutely devastating. What are the choices here? Well, g6, king takes h7. f6 doesn't work because of g6. After f6 by black and g6 by white, we're threatening rook to h8 and then queen to h4 to h7 mate. So, let's look at king takes rook first. You always want to look at checks, captures, and forced moves as your first options. Now queen checks. King g8, now g6. Mate cannot be stopped. The problem is you have bishop on f8, has to move out of the way to avoid mate, and it can only go to e7. So that does nothing to stop queen to h7 and then queen to h8 mate if you move the bishop. So it's all over. The other choice is to play g6. Pawn takes. Now look at the battery we got coming down on the f-file. Absolutely horrible. f5 is the only way to try and stay in the game. And now you take en passant. White's up 3 pawns, and 2 of them happen to be right in front of the black king. This cannot be good. There's no dead body defense in this type of routine here. It's totally lights out for black. So yeah, I thought rook takes h7 here was just absolutely beautiful, beautiful move. So we see that bishop to f8 is not the defense. Rook to f8 has to be tried. And now, if white tries to press through with f5, it really doesn't come to a whole lot. He can try rook to d1, rook to fe8, and then bishop to d4. Queen to h4 and h6. White's g-pawn is pinned, so he can't capture on h6, and black may be able to hold this. But bishop to d4, e5, fe5, de5, rook to f1 now, threatening queen takes f7, and then all sorts of nasty things on the f and h files. Rook f8, queen to f5, g6, queen takes e5, picking up a pawn, queen takes, bishop takes, and now stunning move, and the only move that can hold the draw for black here. You want to pause the video? What would you do? See what you can come up with and then hit play. Well, the best chance for a draw for black here is to play knight takes c2. The idea behind knight takes c2 is a very tactical shot, because after king takes c2, bishop takes e4 check. Now the king goes anywhere, and then we're going to go bishop to g2, forking the little rooks there, getting the material back. Wow, some crazy stuff. But this is just an example of what the knight arc can hold. It can be very forgiving. You can be in a very bad position, but if you have these kind of tactical shots at your disposal, you can often save what may seem to be a lost game. Alright, let's get back to our game. In this position, Robbie played g6. Ryan played bishop to e2. Now, as I watched the game unfold live, I felt that Robbie would find a way out of this mess. I wasn't sure if g6 was a mistake or not. I put my faith in Robbie that he's handled many of these positions and gotten out of them. I've seen Robbie play many of these positions in tournaments, and it looked like he was absolutely getting crushed on the king side. And since I'm a Nador fan from white and black, I've often asked him after the games how he did, and he said he won, even though it looked like he was dead lost. Again, the power in Nador has a lot of opportunity there. Alright, so, but one slip like that can be fatal if white finds the right path. So he plays bishop to e2. It'd be nice to get the bishop to g4, and then push f5, just overpower the e6 pawn, which is going to open up the f file. Here Robbie plays f6. But there's actually possibly a better defense with h5. And the point here is if he sacks the bishop, which he certainly can, black can always play king to g7 and rook to h8. If he doesn't sack the bishop right now, king to g7 and rook h8 is going to solidify the h-pawn. So if he's going to take en passant, he has to do it here and now. Then knight takes c2, h7 check. Do we know what to do here, folks? Yeah, the dead body defense. This has to be in your toolbox when you play the knight arc. Rook to c1, and the knight gets rounded up in a prosaic manner. White's winning here. Now, I said white's winning here, though I recommended that being the best defense. That's actually true. Because after f6 is in the game, bishop to g4 would just absolutely crush. But Ryan played g takes f6 here, which is not the most accurate way to continue the attack. Let's look at bishop to g4. Now, the idea that black had by playing f6 is he could play f5 now. ef5, ef5. Okay. Time for another little quiz for you folks. Let me flip the board once again. Here we have white to move, white to play and win. How do you handle the attack from here? Pause the video, see what you can find for white to play. When you're convinced you got the right line, hit play and we'll see. So we will proceed on with the move, and that is, well, it's kind of a trick question. Same move as the last quiz. Rook takes h7. Right, this time there is no choice but to take it. You don't want to have queen to h4 coming in without having some kind of defense. So we get something for the troubles at least. King g8, queen to h6, king to f7, rook to e1 to stop the fleeing king. And now if rook to h8, we go rook takes e7, king takes, queen here, check, king up, take here. Now we go here, check. And if he goes to the back rank, we're picking up that rook on h8, so king to d7, queen takes f5, check, king c6, bishop to e3, and it is this quiet bishop move that makes the final weave in the mating net. Black cannot avoid mate in a few more moves. Even though he's basically a rook up, black is completely lost. Okay, let's go back to an earlier part in this. Instead of from this position where white played rook to e1 instead of rook to h8, he tries to get the king out of dodge right away. And queen takes pawn check, rook to f7, queen to g8, king to d7. If rook to f8, then we got queen to e6, rook f7, bishop h5, pinning the rook, winning. Mate would follow. King to d7, queen takes rook, and white will win easily from here. And here, in case you were wondering why not king to d7, well, we got queen to e6 check and then mate. So bishop g4 offered a much more aggressive way to handle this line. Let's get back to the game. After Robbie played f6, Ryan played g takes f6. Maybe he can get in bishop g4 without having to worry about f5 coming in, but we saw there that there are great tactics available in the position for white. Bishop takes f6, e5, d-e5, and now it is so tempting to play the move that Ryan did, and I'm sure that time pressure brought this about, but bishop g4 is by far the best move here. Ryan played rook to d7. Now, if I recall correctly, I think Ryan had somewhere between 7 and 10 minutes on his clock, but Robbie was living on borrowed time using a lot of the increment. He gets 30 seconds per move. So having such a short amount of time to find the correct defense is not an easy task. But he starts it out correctly. He plays rook takes c3 here. This is black's only shot at survival. Now, why Ryan did not play rook takes c3, bishop c8, and bishop to a7, when white is a bit better here. Oh, I have to say white is clearly better here. Okay, he's up a rook and a rook for a piece and a pawn, and his pieces are still pretty active. You know, white seems clearly better here, but he's not absolutely winning in this variation. Instead, he played b takes c3 here. And this is a mistake that allows black back into the game. Now, Robbie plays knight to d5, which is a mistake, and so terrible that he was in such time pressure, because Robbie could have played bishop to c8 first here. His concept knight to d5 is the right idea. In other words, this is going to get a piece off of the b file, and once the bishop moves off of b8, that bishop on b6 is pinned and it's going to fall, or the bishop will have to move from b6, which means the bishop on b7 moving is going to come with discovered check. So that's what Robbie was thinking about, I'm sure. But if he had played bishop to c8 first, getting the other piece out of the way, white would have to play bishop to a7 here. Not an easy move to find in time pressure. He could try rook d takes h7, getting the rook that was attacked out of the way. But now after knight to d5, Alright, this is attacking and winning the pinned bishop. F takes e5. Knight takes b6. Oddly now it is white that needs to be careful. Otherwise he could be in deep trouble. But fortunately he has a perpetual he can bail out with. Rook to h8 check. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Rook takes. Queen takes. And then a simple perpetual from here. Okay, he could have saved the game, but it's not a win. Going back after bishop c8, the best defense would be bishop to a7. And now, if I told you once, I told you 1,000 times, you get many chances in the Sicilian. You don't have to wait for Spider-Man to come give you your one chance. Then Najdorf, you get a lot of chances. All right, what is the only move here that allows black to save the game? There's only one. Take your time, pause the video if you need, and see if you can find the best move for black here. Okay, we're going to press on. Surprisingly, the best move in this position is knight to d3, discovered check. And it's hitting the queen on f2. Beautiful stuff. So now after bishop takes b8, knight takes f2, both the rooks are attacked. The one on d7 by the bishop, the one on h3 by the knight. Rook d takes h7, knight takes rook, rook takes, e takes f4, bishop takes f4. And kids, the position is dead level here. If anything, maybe black stands slightly better. The pawns are equal. The white has doubled c-pawns, though I don't think that either side is going to be able to make much of this position. Some crazy stuff, but it's there. That's the beauty of the Najdorf. Alright, so in the game, knight to d5 was played by Robbie, and again, white misses the winning shot here. I've told you what the move was once before. You should be able to figure it out pretty quickly. Bishop to g4 was a move that had to be played. Ryan played bishop to a7. We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's take a look at bishop to g4. All right, well, we got to defend that pawn. Otherwise, we're totally dead. Rook to e8 so that we can at least keep the queen on b file for some tactical shots. F takes e5. And now knight takes b6. Note that queen takes e5 does not work because of bishop to d4. We try queen to b8. Threatens a discovered check, but simply king to c1. And this is very good for white. Black is pretty much certain he's going to lose a kingside defender, or at least trade it off for white's bishop on d4. He can play e5, but that's going to allow rook h takes h7. And, well, let's just take a quick look at that. If e5, we sack the bishop. And if pawn takes, we go rook h to g7. King to here. Well, we're threatening rook takes and then queen to h4. So black can try maybe queen to e5. Okay, that's going to end up hanging the bishop on b7 in the long run. Yeah, really complex stuff, but white's going to come out on top. So instead of queen takes e5, knight takes b6, ef6. That's the only try for a win. Knight takes d7, f7, king to g7, pawn takes equals knight, forcing the queen to capture right away. If king to h8, then queen f7 is going to win easily. And if queen takes h8, queen to e3. Black has a pawn and a knight for the rook, but sadly his pieces just don't work well together. And if knight to f6, bishop takes e6, and white has a decisive edge in this endgame. So at least in this way, black has managed to avoid getting mated, but he goes into a lost ending. In the game, bishop to a7 was played, and after queen to c8, rook h takes h7, and now knight takes c3. It's not so clear here. Knight takes c3 is a good move, but it's surprising that bishop to c6 should also hold the draw. Because if white tries to continue with the attack with, say, queen to g3, queen to e8 covers the pawn. It's hard to see how white can break through in this position. But I like Robbie's move because it gives counter chances to actually win the game if white is not careful. Alright, so at this point, Robbie is really, really breathing thin air on the time increment. Ryan, who had a bit of time left, had to take quite a bit of time to figure out where to put his king here, and he did move it to the safest place. He played king to c1, and now Robbie, being so short of time, played e takes f4, which is a devastatingly bad mistake. Let's actually go back to where knight takes c3 was played. When we were looking at this, the commentators and the viewers, we were all thinking, well, he has to play king to c1, otherwise the queen can come in, infiltrate. Queen to c6 is threatening many things. There's just too many things that are hanging out there for white. So we were figuring you have to play king to c1, and I think Robbie was thinking that too, but Ryan didn't take a whole lot of time. He took a couple minutes, which we were hoping would give Robbie time to find something miraculous, though we all thought that it wasn't going to be there. But it's there. Can you find a move that saves the game for black here? It's a very difficult concept to see, but it's based on a perpetual check. What should black play here? Pause the video, and when you think you have the answer, hit resume, and we'll see if you got it right. Well, since I'm telling you that pawn takes isn't the right move, it usually narrows it down to being a check. So checks, captures, and force moves. The only check and force move is knight a2 check. What are the choices here? If king to d1, then rook to d8 pins one of the aggressive rooks and removes all of white's threats, and maintains black's threats. And if you think king to d2 is going to be met by rook to d8, you're wrong. It's met by a much more powerful line. Queen to c3 check. Where does the king go? He's got one place. Queen to a1 check. Where does the king go? He's got one place. Queen to c1 check. Where does the king go? He's got one place. e4 check. Where does the king go? He's got one place. Queen to c2 is mate. Pretty nifty, huh? The tables can turn. Okay, so that's a cute little mate. So we know that white can't go to d1 or d2. I actually saw those lines, but I didn't see for sure whether this line was going to afford a perpetual check or not. King to b1 and king to b2 are the only lines to look at. Let's look at king to b2. This really looks like the less logical because it's going to allow queen to c3 check. And then if king to b1 here, bishop to d5, actually it looks like it's going to give black a winning attack here. Surprising, right? A move like e4 or e takes f4, we're threatening mate right on the move. So very dangerous for white. So after queen c3, he's only really got one choice after that, and that's to take the knight. And then queen takes c2, and then we can just go around checking forever, really, and bishop to e4 check. If he tries to go on so he can win, bishop to e4, bishop d3, now we can trade. Queen to b4 check, queen to b2, queen takes queen, king takes, and now e takes f4, discover check, king to b3, and the rook is hanging on h7 at the end of all this. Black has a winning endgame. So it's very critical to play knight to a2. 3 out of 4 lines say it's winning for black. Okay, to be fair, king to b2, and we can just go for this perpetual type. So actually, it's not even perpetual now that I look at it. He can't go to a1 because of ef4 check, and king to a3 is just bringing his king out to the center. All right, now queen a5. Okay, yeah, this is forcing him off of the a file. Very good. Okay, so this is winning for black. Now, the last line to look at is king to b1. We can look at all the other lines and say, okay, we started here. We can go knight to c3, check, and do it all over again. But actually, black can play for the win here with queen to c3. This is amazing. White will have to come up with the very best defense, and it's really not easy. The point here is that king takes a2 would lose to a similar line that we just looked at. And rook to d3 falls into queen to b4 check. Now if king takes a2, then ef4 is going to win for black. Just opening up that diagonal is all black needs. So rook to b3, knight to c3 check, king to b2, and queen to e4. This should draw after rook takes b7, e takes f4. Again, you don't want to take on c3 because e takes f4 is coming with check. So you have to play the line that draws, and that's rook takes, and then this. Black is only 2 pawns for the rook. The open nature of the white king assures him of at least a draw. So here after queen c3, white needs to find a move queen to h4. But, or the last line we looked at, queen to h4 actually only holds a draw too because of queen to b4. Now if king takes a2, then we got bishop to d5 check. Then it's going to be c4, bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and it looks like it's going to be a draw by perpetual. King to a1, queen to c3, king to b1. Yeah, this is just going to be a draw. So miraculously, after king c1, knight to a2 would draw. But like I said, poor Robbie was so low on time. God bless him. I mean, he put on a hell of a show here. Even though it wasn't perfect, it was a very fun game to watch, and it's always entertaining. And you hate to see one of your friends lose, and in a team situation, you really hate to see it happen. But wow, what a fight between these two. But now he decides it's time to play bishop to g4, whereas on 2 other occasions it was the right move. And now Robbie sees knight to a2. Oh, the nightmares of these positions. And remember what I told you is most important about the Najdorf? Timing. Okay. He plays knight to a2. But guess what, folks? Queen to c6. Exclam. Now, what are White's choices here? Bishop d4 is interesting because it blocks that diagonal. We'll see why that might be needed. Let's look at rook takes b7, right? It's a free piece. Rook to d8, rook h to c7, knight a2 check, king to b1, and knight to c3 actually forces a perpetual check. There is no way to get out of this. The problem that he has is the bishop on f6 has come alive, and even though he's got his rooks on b7 and c7, stopping any checks from black on those files, the knight and the bishop and the rook all work together to force a perpetual check. Bishop to d4, as I mentioned. But this allows simplification. Queen to h1. Now the best move here is obviously just trade queens. And bishop to d5. Black has restored material equality to the board. You know, this is certainly a position worth playing on if the players had time. Actually, you know, it's hard to say. The rooks on the 7th really look hard for Black to deal with, but they're not threatening anything on their own right now. And Black has pretty much knotted up the position. Things are pretty level here. But Robbie plays knight a2 check here, and what's the difference? Well, now king to d1, and rook to d8 does not work here because white has bishop takes e6 check. That makes all the difference in the world. Now, if Black were to try and fight on, he could try queen to c4, giving up the bishop on b7, knight c3, king to e1, f3, bishop takes f3, knight to e4. The trick here to avoid is bishop takes e4, because after bishop to c3, white gets mated in like 13 moves. I'm serious. It's mated in 13 moves. So queen to e2 is a simple retort to that. Queen c3 check. He again avoids king to d1, queen to a1, rook back and mate. So as long as these tricks are missed. But white can just simply sidestep these cheeky little tricks with king to f1, knight to d2 check, king to g2. Of course, he's got to come up to protect the bishop. Last trick to avoid. And now bishop to e5 and bishop g4, and white is winning. Black's little cheeky shots are all done, and there's too much pressure on Black's king side. So he could have tried queen to c4. You know, at least it offered some chances. But, you know, when you're short of time, you got to just make a move. So bishop d5 was played. And now bishop to d4. And there's no saving the game at this point. Black is just busted. Robbie threw in knight c3 check. King to e1. Knight to e4. Attacking the queen. You know, thinking he'd get a little bit of time back on the clock, another 30 seconds, but Ryan was on the ball, and he saw the best move here. Let me flip the board. White to play and mate in 3 moves. Set your clocks and go. All right, pause the video if you need to. Find a mate in 3 for white. Yeah, Ryan found this right away. D takes g7. Of course, these are the kind of things you're calculating all along on every turn, saying, can I get away with this? Bishop takes g7. Rook takes g7. Check. King to h8 is the only move, and now queen to h4 is checkmate. So, a very interesting battle. Credit both players with a really tremendous fight. It's too bad Robbie had to lose this one. Really miraculous stuff could have happened in this game. I don't think that it would have taken the Game of the Week honors away from Bartel. Bartel's game was a very nice game. And there's just too many errors in this game. Too many to overlook. But, like I said from the outset, the Sicilian Nidor, it gives you some chances. Often gives you several chances. Alright, that's it for this video. I've tried to make it as short as I could, but as you can see, I never succeed in that. I'm sorry, folks. Be sure to leave comments, suggestions, and until next time, good luck.